of you don't know me, my name is Mary Mannix, and I'm the Maryland Room Manager here at the Seaboard Arts Public Library. We are again delighted to have you come out, and we are delighted to be working in partnership with our colleagues in the Civil War Roundtable. We'll be hearing from their president. Is that your exact title? Their president, Matt, in a few minutes. Well, in a few seconds, actually. Along the lines of housekeeping, there are snacks in the back that the guys are paid for. Please make sure you take part in them, particularly the little chocolate bullets, and then water and coffee and so on and so forth. Our speakers tonight are Paul and Eric, who will be up in a matter of minutes. As I said on some Facebook page the other day, you know, sometimes you've got those patrons, you have those researchers who come into the room who are working for years on God knows what. And you wonder, what in God's name are they doing? And the level of detail they're doing, it's good, it's keeping our stats up, but you don't really know what they're doing, and to a certain extent, you don't care. You know, it's not always our business, all the details of everyone's research propositions. But then when they actually publish something, we were very excited. I mean, we're always happy to see them, but again, coming from my side of the reference desk, sometimes I've never seen two people do the level of intensive, crazy research that these guys have done. And again, delighted to have it end up in their publication that appealed in Battlefield Photographer. There are copies in the Maryland Room. If you don't have your own personal copy now and want to come up tomorrow and read it, it'll be there. It'll be there till the end of time, pretty much. But before the guys go on, Matt has a few words to say. Again, thank you so much for coming out. After Matt gets done and the guys come up, we will dim the lights. And if it gets too scary, let us know. But we have an idea. As you can see, they're being particularly high-tech here. This is the first time we've had 2 projectors working in the room, so we're very excited about that. So Matt, come on up, and again, thank you all so much for coming out, and thank you Civil War Roundtable for partnering.
Thank you, Mary. Again, my name is Matt Borders. I'm the president of the Frederick County Civil War Roundtable. It's great to see you all out here this evening for a Civil War lecture. I know many of you are with my roundtable or are accompanying roundtables in Hagerstown or Carroll County. So thank you very much for coming out tonight. For those of you who are maybe not familiar with the roundtable or roundtables in the region, quick straw poll. How did everybody hear about this lecture tonight? Facebook? Yep, excellent. That's what we kind of figured. We were hitting that really, really hard with the social media, so I'm glad to see that it was working out. We are super excited to, again, partner with Mary here in the Maryland Room here at Seaboard Arts Library, and we're extremely excited to have Paul and Eric here to talk about this very Frederick-focused topic, one of the most famous photographs of the American Civil War right here in downtown Frederick, and the research they have done to dispel some of the legends that have built up around it. So, without any further ado, gentlemen, take it away. Thank you very much.
It's a real honor to be here tonight with Eric. Eric is a technological wizard. I couldn't have done any of the technological stuff without him. We just want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. There must be at least 15 or so Civil War authors and writers in the audience that have had published works. So again, we thank you for your time. Thanks so much for coming out. Please everybody chew in unison. There's plenty of snacks back there. So do you want to say anything before we start the show?
Thank you, Paul, and I guess we're both thanking each other. We both have sort of diametrically opposed talents here. I come from a mapping background. I know relatively little about the Civil War, so I'm not a history guy in terms of Civil War. If you have those questions, go to him. But yeah, my technical expertise in mapping and my unofficial interest in history just glued us together, and we were able to come up with some interesting things. A little housekeeping on our end, by the way. Obviously, you can see we've got 2 presentations. A lot of the stuff we're going to show on the main screen, we felt deserves the ability to correlate where it is that we're talking about on the map. So we're going to try to have a map up there or another static display there, so we can use a laser pointer to maybe point out what it is we're talking about on the main screen. Because a lot of the main screen stuff is newspaper articles and sort of research type stuff. So we're going to try to correlate the 2 together, not flipping back and forth. laser pointer. Yeah, so Paul's going to go first. He's going to explain sort of the library end of the research in the newspapers and how we correlated all that. And then the second half of the presentation, I'm going to kind of mainly take over and explain some of the more technical details about how we took photos, how the maps came together, and some of that. Anyway, so.
Yeah, we'd also like to thank the Center for Civil War Photography for publishing our work. It's a great organization. So, unfortunately, I don't have any recruitment materials here tonight, but you can see a couple of the guys are from the organization that are here, so you can talk with them after the evening. They're also on the webpage, so you can find them on the internet. So.
Hey, Paul?
Yes.
I think I didn't say one of the things you told, I don't think I said anything that you told me to say.
Oh,
But one of the things particular I didn't say was, and it's my understanding that you want people, if they have big questions, to wait to the end. If they have passing little questions like, what the heck do you mean, to do it within, but to hold anything really big till the very end. Am I correct on that?
That's great, yes. Thank you again. Okay, you ready to flip them over?
Yeah, it's ready to go.
Okay. Okay. This is Eric and I.
Well, why don't you start with explaining?
Okay, these are the three photos that reached a wider audience in the year 1965 for the first time. Maybe they were a little bit known only here in Frederick, but their first publication appeared in April 1965 in Civil War Times Illustrated magazine.
For those of you who might, I'm sure everyone here is Civil War people, right? I don't know, let's see. What we had there was the Confederate photo on the left and the two Union photos on the right.
So this is Eric and I in the year 1988. We met in 1984 when we worked together at a landscaping outfit. So we went out to the largest Civil War recreation enactment ever held in Gettysburg, which was the 125th anniversary. Those strange looking things in our caps are bucktails, so we represented the Pennsylvania bucktails on the first day of the battle. This is James B. Murfin on the left. He found the photos in Frederick while doing research for a monumental book called The Gleam of Bayonets, which was published in May of 1965. So Murfin originally brought the three photos to the editor at Civil War Times, who was Frederick E. Ray, an illustrator. Frederick E. Ray was also known for his comic book artwork. And when I was a 17-year-old kid, I was one of the founding members of the Montgomery County Civil War Roundtable in the autumn of 1980. And James B. Murfin was our first invited speaker in November of 1980, and that was 38 years ago. I haven't probably been the best Civil War Montgomery County member over the years. I'll try to get a little bit more back into it. So Benjamin Rosenstock was the man who had the three photos that Murfin was very interested in using them for his book. And Ben's grandfather's store was in the sign in the famous Confederate photo. Now, the man that owned the original three 1860s paper prints was a guy named Benjamin F. Brown, who was accused of being a Confederate spy during the conflict. He lived right here in Frederick. Now, Frederick was about 4/5 Union sentiment during the Civil War and only about 1/5 secessionist. Baltimore, on the other hand, was about equal, sort of 50-50. So Benjamin F. Brown saved or collected these three original paper prints sometime we don't know when, maybe after the Civil War. And this is his wife here on the right, and their son Albert, who was born on September 9, 1863. Now, Albert inherited the three original paper prints from Dad. So these are newspaper clippings of when Benjamin F. Brown was arrested the two times. Once in 1862, he was brought to Baltimore's slave pen, the Pratt slave pen, and then the second time in 1864, he was brought down to the old Capitol Prison in Washington, D.C. Now, when Benjamin F. Brown was acquitted for the second time, it was in the middle of June 1864. And the provost marshal that acquitted Brown, that gave the judgment, had no clue that Jubilee army was in the valley at that time, heading toward the north. If he had known that, he probably would have kept Benjamin F. Brown in prison. But when Brown was acquitted the second time, we are most certain that the judge said, look, you've been arrested twice. If we see your face back here again, 3 strikes, you're out. You'll probably be swinging from a rope. So when the Confederates came through Frederick on July 9th, Benjamin Brown probably stayed off the streets, because if any of his neighbors that were Unionists had seen his face and communicating with the Confederates, it would have been the end of the line for Benjamin F. Brown. And this is his son, Albert S. Brown, who had the original 3 paper print photos, 2 of the Union troops and 1 of the Confederates. And he passed away of a heart attack in January 1937. Unfortunately, when he died, that is all we know about the end of the line of the original 3 paper prints. And Benjamin F. Brown had a few sons and daughters, and then Albert S. Brown only had 1 child, and that was a daughter. And she married a guy named Lefferts in the 20s. Now, sadly, Mr. Lefferts committed suicide in the year 1950, and then Mildred passed away in Arlington, Virginia on June 10, 1968. So unfortunately, none of us knew about the 3 original paper prints in 1968. So she's the last one that may have known the whereabouts of the 3 original paper prints. Now, these are advertisements in the Frederick Examiner before the Civil War began of the artists that were most likely the sign painters that painted the images in the 3 surviving Civil War photos. One was a very tall sign for James Landau, a clothing merchant. The other sign was for Joseph Rosenstock, also a Jewish clothing merchant. And the other sign was the Examiner sign itself that we can see in the 3 oldest photos that survive of North Market Street. There is nothing older. There are no surviving daguerreotypes that we know about, which was an older form of photography than glass plate photography. So, Eric and I, in our quest to try to establish where the Rosenstock store may have been in the famous photo, we couldn't line up some of the elements where the photo was thought to have been taken from. So I said to Eric one day, I said, look, the only way we're going to get to the bottom of this, and maybe no one's ever gone this far, is we have to find the advertisements in the newspapers which will try to pinpoint where Rosenstock's location was. So this ad first appears on April 11th in the Frederick Examiner. This is the first evidence that we have that Joseph Rosenstock had a store. Before that, we have an 1859 business directory of Frederick. And that has names of all merchants and business owners in town. But at that time, in 1859, Joseph Rosenstock was a peddler with a push cart or a mule cart. So in 1859, he's listed in the directory as a peddler. So then he gets enough money or credit together to open this store, which was the property of a guy named Schlesinger, who owned properties that I tend to use the word lots. I'm not sure Eric likes that word so much, but
This might be a good spot to show you guys the map. Obviously, this is Frederick. I'm sure most of you are familiar with Frederick. This map is oriented north. And the stuff that Paul's talking about right now is Rosenstock's store, which is right about here. Before he opened this store, he was a peddler, and he was living on this corner here, which is near the Venice Mill. Here is not the square corner, the Market Square.
Market
The
Square.
Market Square is right here, and the old courthouse. Here is the Frederick Town Savings Institution and Rosenstock's new store. Down here is Patrick Street, and this is where, up until now, the store, the photo and the store were believed to have been located. All this research is shown otherwise.
Now, what happened was Rosenstock ran these series of ads for a few months, and then this one on the right was the autumn of 1860. Now, probably not long after that, Rosenstock had seen Landauer's giant sign with a yellow post and thought to himself, man, I really need one of those to compete with Landauer, who is right next door. So after his large sign was probably put up, he spent no more money on advertising. But there appears no other ads during the Civil War until the very end of the war. And there were a couple of really interesting incidents that happened with Rosenstock. His hard luck. In August of 1864, he's arrested by Provost Marshal Yella of the Potomac Home Brigade, Union Army. And the Union Army passed around notices to all the businesses. No selling liquor to soldiers. No selling civilian clothing to soldiers. And the reason that they didn't want the soldiers getting a hold of civilian clothing was because thousands and thousands of Union Army soldiers during the war would have their kinfolk from back home in the north send them boxes of civilian clothing. The Union soldiers would jump into the woods, put on the civilian clothing, sneak away from the army. So the provost marshals throughout the war would try everything they could to keep the soldiers from slipping away. Now, another interesting thing that happens to Rosenstock, almost near the very end of the war, on the 30th of March, 3 Union soldiers robbed and bludgeoned Rosenstock to the ground. They knocked him to the ground. One soldier was pacing back and forth on the sidewalk when the 2 others were inside, and Rosenstock didn't know why the guy out front was pacing back and forth for a while. Well, he was the lookout. So when he opened the front door, that was the signal for his 2 comrades inside to bludgeon and knock Rosenstock down and run off with boxes of rings and watches. Now, what was very sad about this incident that happened on March 30th, 1865 is it's just days before General Lee surrenders on April 9th. So, unfortunately, the perpetrators of this crime were never caught because there's a big celebration at the end of the war. Everybody forgets about poor Rosenstock. It was just an unfortunate thing. Also, at this time, he was planning on closing out his store. And one of the issues was Schlesinger, the property owner, wanted to sell the property where Rosenstock was in. So he sort of gave the notice to Rosenstock that, unfortunately, I need to sell this property. You're going to have to vacate. But one of the other unfortunate things was that when the Confederates took $200,000 in Jack on July 9th, 1864, this was probably close to $1 billion in today's money equivalent. So what this does is it creates a trickle of effect all through Frederick, where all the merchants are suffering because nobody has any extra money to buy stuff like clothing or photographs. They buy food, but little else is bought. So all the merchants in Frederick are starting to suffer by the autumn and early winter of 1865. So this is Rosenstock's closing advertisement. After his 1860 ad in autumn, there's no more advertising in the Examiner or the Citizen newspapers. But this talks about how he wants to close out and sell his last stock of goods. Now, the ad on the right is from year 1868, when Rosenstock moves to the Patrick Street, Market Street corner location. Now, all the historians thought that Rosenstock was at the corner of Market and Patrick Street during the Civil War, but he does not move there until April 1868. Now, these two photos were taken on the 22nd of February, a George Washington's birthday celebration very early in the war with General Nathaniel Banks' Union forces. And these photos were noted to have been taken by a photographer named Egbert Guy Fawkes, who we believe was born in Kentucky and then settled in Baltimore when the war was over. And he took a lot of photographs working for the Andrew Russell firm that he hired on later on. He actually taught wet plate to Russell. Russell had the means and the money to have the photography firm. Now, Fawkes was a freelancer. So not long after he took these photos, he leaves the prints or the glass plates with the Examiner newspaper office. And that sign is there on the left.
Where these two photos were taken, for those of you who might not know Frederick, but this is the first block of Market Street where most of the action was taking place. These photos, both of these photos were taken out of this building right there in the corner.
And that was called the Coppersmith Hall.
The Coppersmith Hall, which was a strong Union sentiment
Right.
building. And,
So what we figured out from the angles and where these photos were taken, I'll tell you really quick, this one on the right, this is the entrance to Old Market Square, which was a beautiful stone structure. We have people in this country, the United States, that pay money to fly over to Europe and go on vacation in Europe and see all the old German architecture. Well, unfortunately, this was a beautiful piece of architecture that was torn down in 1873, all in the name of progress. So there are very, very few photos in existence, maybe one or two others that show the entrance of Market Square. It had two pedestrian entrances on each side of the center arch. And those pedestrian entrances went to the back, which was a huge area where all the peddlers set up with wagons and carts. The peddlers that could not afford the rent to open a store.
that building, by the way, today is, you might know it as Brewer's Alley, the restaurant right here. It still has a little bit of that look to it. I mean, it's got the two side walkways there. And over here on the map, this is the market.
Market Square.
Yeah, the market. This is the building here. This big elongated building, and the merchants would set up on either side of that and in the back.
I guess it actually shows the two pedestrian entrances.
Yeah,
on the
I mean, if you
side
look real
below.
close, you can see both right there.
Yeah.
It's a big, long building.
Behind all of that was a cemetery. So this is very interesting. This is some of the details from that Egbert G. Fawkes photo. Now, one of the problems is with these photos of the Union troops, Ben Rosenstock had copies made from Albert S. Brown's original photos made about the year 1930 by the Edmonston firm in downtown Frederick. So what happened was Benjamin Rosenstock donated his two Edmonston prints of Nathaniel Banks' Union Army from Washington's birthday celebration. He donated this print on the right and the other one that showed Market Square, he donated to his congregation B'nai B'rith in Washington, D.C. for a Centennial Civil War exhibit in the year 1961. And unfortunately, when that exhibit ended at the end of the summer in 1961, his two original Edmonston prints that were created in 1930 went missing. So the only copies that we have of the Egbert G. Fawkes photos are copies of copies of copies, which does not have the best contrast. So therefore, it is very hard to see the wording. Now, we speculate Eric is working on, with computer mapping and his graphics, we speculate that this could be Rosenstock's sign. As you can see over on the left, it's just about illegible. Now, it could have been a photographic sign that says Byerly and Son with the ampersand. This is about the only thing that you can see on the left that makes sense to us. But having said that, if you had Rosenstock sign and Byerly sign and Landauer sign all very close together, it would have been very, very crowded at that part of Market Street. So we're not actually sure that that is Rosenstock's sign. Now, the photo that's on the left is from year 1908, and this shows the original Coppersmith Hall building, Eric can point it out with the laser, and it shows the balcony where Egbert G. Fox stood on that balcony to take this photo here. So he's looking in our direction with the camera lens. And we know this photo on the left dates the year 1908 because down at the end of the block, there's a William James Bryant billboard. And he ran for president 3 times and lost to McKinley and Roosevelt. And in year 1908, his vice presidential running mate was a guy named John W. Kern. So this photo dates itself to the late summer, early autumn of 1908. So we're going to talk a little bit about James Landauer. James Landauer moves in to the ground floor in 1858 of the building that is owned by Jacob Byerly, who is a photographer. And Jacob Byerly was Frederick's first photographer doing daguerreotypes beginning in 1842. He later moves on to wet plate photography. As photography grows and develops with paper prints and all those up-to-date specimens or the art of the newer processes. So his ad here says the Yellow Post store. So his giant Landauer sign must have been on a tall yellow painted post. Okay, this is J.R. Markin's ad on the left. When the Civil War begins, Byerly and Markin are the only 2 photographers in Frederick. Before the war, just a year or 2 before the war, there may have been a couple of others. Was it Goldsboro?
There were 2 other daguerreotypists that were listed in the 1859 directory. And I don't know my art history very well, but daguerreotypes were basically an extension of painting and just trying to recreate art in that regard. So these other 2 daguerreotypists that in 1859, Riddlemoser and Smallwood, probably didn't make it in the industry of actually taking pictures. They probably were more artists in that regard. And by the time of the Civil War, we don't see their names.
So what we do know from these ads that J.R. Markin has, we know his exact location because he describes it. So we know he's on the 3rd floor of the Coppersmith Hall building. And we knew from the location, looking down at the photo of Markin Square entrance, that that photograph was taken from the 3rd floor window of J.R. Markin's studio. Now, J.R. Markin and Byerly are both Union men. Jacob Byerly came from old Pennsylvania stock. Byerly changes the spelling of his last name before the Civil War. Maybe he didn't want to be associated with some of the other Byerly family lineage for some reason that we don't know, but he changes the spelling of his last name. Now, Markin stays at the Coppersmith Hall location until almost the very end of the war. And at the very end of the war in 1865, this advertisement was the first one appeared. It appeared on May 17, 1865. So he moves from just north on Market Street, north of Jacob Byerly's studio. He moves just to the south of his studio. Now this is Jacob Byerly's first ad on the left. Now what happens is Byerly purchases the property in 1852, but the property he purchased might have been only a 2-story structure when he purchased it in 1852. We looked through the tax records, we went through everything we could to find out how many floors this building has that Byerly purchases, but we can't come to any specific conclusion. So what happens is Byerly, probably in the middle 1850s, toward the end, he's probably having a 3rd story connected to this structure. And with that 3rd story, he needs skylights in the roof to be a photographer. All these photographers had to have skylights in the roof to take good photos. Now this image in the center is an early daguerreotype self-portrait that he takes by setting up a camera on the other side of the roof. Now, Byerly, when the war begins, has a studio over on West Patrick Street, right near the Market Patrick Street intersection, if you want to point that out on the map.
Sure, yeah. The Byerly, like Paul said, he came to Frederick in 1840, 1842 maybe.
Or he opens up the first Hungarian establishment in 1842.
Right, and we think he opened up, I'll show you later but in the presentation, but we think his first establishment was right here at the Examiner Building. The Maryland,
In the 1840s, right?
the Maryland Historical Trust in the building records has an article in there that says that was Byerly's first building. By
And
18
this building also has skylights in the roof.
Yeah, and by the 1850s, we know that Byerly's lived here, by the way, like right in this area, right where the Frederick County Courthouse is right now. But by the 1850s, we start to see advertisements for Byerly, and back then they didn't have addresses. So we see advertisements listed as it's called the south side of Patrick Street, west of Market. So his first studio was a rented studio in one of these 2 buildings, very close to where Colonial Jewelers is right now. And then he eventually buys the property where the photo was taken from, right here. In 1852, he purchases the property, and then by
He moves in. The studio is ready in March or April of 1862. So this ad appears first, telling that he's now in his own property on top of James Landauer's store. The Landauer family lives on the 2nd floor above his clothing store. So Byerly takes the 3rd floor on the top. So this is after the war. This is how Jacob Byerly looks by the late 1860s. He turns over the studio to his son, who was born on February 18, 1839, John Davis Byerly. And Jacob was born in 1807. So by the middle part of the war, Jacob Byerly is now about the same age that I am now, about 55. His eyesight is not so good anymore. He needs his son to operate the camera most of the time. Jacob probably does a lot of the red tape by the time the Civil War comes around and greets customers in the parlor. Now, toward the very end of the war, in 1864, a photographer named Henry Tobias rents the area on Patrick Street where Byerly had been in 1861. So Tobias rents this spot because it has a skylight. On the left is one of Tobias's CDV card photos. And that George Washington stamp was a government-mandated tax stamp that all photographers had to bill the customer with a 3-cent tax for every photo that was sold. Now this 3-cent tax went to raise money for the North for the war effort. So that's why the government starts to tax all photos that are sold. Now the tax is in effect till I think about autumn 1866 or maybe summer of 1866. So any CDV photos that are in existence that have this tax stamp can be dated to that 2-year period because of that reason. Now, this is John Davis Byerly, Jacob Byerly's son. He was born in 1839. So this image of him on the left is a post-war image. Now, what's very interesting is that because the Confederates with Jubal Early ransomed Frederick for $200,000, and it creates suffering for all of the merchants in town. At the very end of the war, all of the Union soldiers that were a good part of both J.R. Markin and Byerly's photo business, they take a lot of CDV photos of Union soldiers that have come down from all the northern states, Michigan, Massachusetts, New York State, wherever. But when the Civil War ends, all of these Union soldiers are mostly going back home now. So they're not around to get their photos taken. Along with Tobias and Markin and Byerly at the end of the war, because of the Confederates robbing all of the money, $200,000, nobody is getting photographs made anymore. People can only buy food. So this creates a downward spiral. There's no customers coming by the studio anymore. So Tobias goes under because very few customers are coming into Tobias' studio. Jacob Byerly figures that he can run the studio himself because there's very few customers coming in. John Davis Byerly goes on a carpetbagging expedition. He needs to take photos to make money. So, where is a place you can take photos? In the South, after the war. The South is devastated by the war. There's no more chemicals for photography. Okay? Anyway, when Byerly goes on this expedition to take photos in North Carolina, he gets arrested with a guy named Nemo that's working with him. And they cause a riot in Richmond. A pistol fired up in the air. So this is John Davis Byerly's son, Charles Byerly, who takes over the business way after the Civil War. On the very right is